Welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at the Iliad, Book 2. Let's start by talking about the major characters in this book. Zeus, who in the last book made a promise to let the Trojans win for a while, begins to fulfill his promise in this book. And although he tries to keep some balance within this war, he sets off the events that are going to lead ultimately to the Trojans taking the lead. He's portrayed here as a great and powerful leader, but someone also who's trying to fulfill a certain obligation without getting himself in too much trouble. We also return to the character Agamemnon, who we saw as pretty much a colossal jerk in Book 1. Here it's time for Agamemnon to show his stuff as a military leader, and we see him attempting to use reverse psychology on his men, as well as bark orders to get his men in line. He still doesn't really shine as a leader, but he is portrayed as being rather intimidating and powerful, but also unfortunately manipulated by the gods. Nestor steps back into his role as an advisor, and he is ready to back up Agamemnon at all costs, which is unfortunate again because we see Agamemnon being manipulated by the gods. Athena and Hera reprise the same kind of role of goddesses who really want the Greeks to win and who will step in when things get a little bit chaotic to make sure that the Greeks follow their leaders. Calchas also reprises the role of the seer as someone who predicts the future of how the battle is going to go. Two new characters step into the limelight, the first being Odysseus, who's one of the powerful Greek leaders. He's such an important character, in fact, that he's going to get a sequel, the Odyssey. In Book 2 of the Iliad, we note him as being very clever, but also he has the important role of keeping the army in line. When chaos breaks out among the ranks, it's Odysseus who has to get everybody back on track and lined back up. When dissension arises in the camp, it's Odysseus who has to set things right. And so he becomes the voice of authority and reason in this book. Finally, we meet Thersites. Thersites is a naysayer. He is a mouthy troll. He likes to mock and make fun of absolutely everyone. So, what happens in Book 2? At the end of Book 1, Zeus had promised to support the Trojan side in order for the Greeks to lose for a while to bring glory to Achilles, who is sitting out. So they would come crawling to him and begging for his help. Zeus tosses and turns in bed, trying to think about how he's going to do that. And he finally decides to send a dream to Agamemnon, telling him that this is the day of victory and that he needs to charge into battle. That will get things started. The dream appears in the form of Nestor and tells Agamemnon that this is his time. It's time to rise up and fight against Troy. It's time to finally make his charge. Agamemnon wakes up feeling excited and confident. He throws on his armor and he strides out to his generals, telling them all about his dream. Nestor completely backs up his story, saying, if Agamemnon says it, it must be true, even though we know the gods are manipulating them. And then Agamemnon gets the bright idea that he's going to use reverse psychology on the general army. So he and his generals walk out there, and Agamemnon says, we've been here for 9 years and nothing's happened. I say we give up and all go home. Instead of all the men saying, no, we want to finish this war, they all say, yep, fine, and they turn and they dash for the boats, getting ready to break away. Things are so chaotic that Hera and Athena have to step in. Hera sends Athena to swoop down and tap Odysseus on the shoulder, telling him to get the people under control before all is lost. So Odysseus runs not straight to the people, but to Agamemnon and grabs his scepter, and then begins to run among the men, directing the generals how to get their men back in line. And whenever he runs up to a common soldier deserter, he whacks him with the scepter and says, "Get back in line!" Finally, the men all gather back together on the beach in front of Agamemnon again. But the conflict isn't over because Thersites, the mouthy troll, stands up and begins to mock Agamemnon. Now, we know that Agamemnon has his flaws as a leader. And when Achilles stood up to Agamemnon, that seemed like a good thing. But there is a difference between standing up to bad leadership and simply being a mouthy troll. Thersites' mockery is not productive. It doesn't help things to become better. Not to mention that Thersites is crass and abusive of everybody around him. Odysseus has to go up and whack Thersites over the head and shoulders with the scepter. And the beating of Thersites gets everybody else in line, and everybody else appreciates Thersites finally shutting up. It's enough to get everyone back quiet and listening to Agamemnon. Odysseus and then Nestor reaffirm their support for Agamemnon as a leader, and point out that Agamemnon was testing the men and that they failed miserably. After all, Calchas had once prophesied that it would take 10 years before they beat Troy. They've waited these 9, there's no way they should leave now. And Agamemnon gives a big speech rallying the men back, saying, now is our time, now we're going to defeat the Trojans, and anybody who hangs back and acts like a coward is going to be food for the birds and dogs. And then he gives a big sacrifice to Zeus, which we hear in the narrative Zeus appreciates, but is not really going to answer their prayer. He's not going to give them immediate victory. And so Agamemnon commands all of the troops to line up and be prepared for war. The rest of Book 2 is Agamemnon walking down the line and meeting with each of the generals. And we get this lineup of great heroes. And we don't stop at the end of the Achaean line either, because then we jump over the Trojan line and we see them all lined up and ready to go. It becomes a good running list of key names to pay attention to through the rest of the book. So now let's look at the key features of this book. First of all, there's another evocation of the Muse, which happens at the beginning of the lineup. In line 573 in Robert Fagel's translation, it says, "Sing to me now, you Muses, who hold the halls of Olympus. You are goddesses, you are everywhere, you know all things. All we hear is the distant ring of glory. We know nothing. Who were the captains of Achaea? Who were the kings? The mass of troops I could never tally, never name, not even if I had 10 tongues and 10 mouths, a tireless voice and the heart inside me bronze. Never, unless you Muses of Olympus, daughters of Zeus, whose shield is rolling thunder, sing, sing in memory all who gathered under Troy. Now I can only tell the lords of the ships in all their numbers." And so he calls on the Muses to help him to be able to tell the names of the great heroes. It's too many to name all of these Greek soldiers, but remind me of who these heroes were so that I can sing their story. We also have a traditional element of a lot of epic stories of a heroic lineup. Many epic poems, especially the classical epics, include a lineup of major characters early in the work. And this book definitely serves that purpose. There are also several examples of epic similes in this book. Epic similes are these extended and drawn out similes where the tenor and the vehicle have been switched. For example, he says, "As ravening fire rips through the big strands of timber, high on a mountain ridge, and blazes flares miles away, so from the marching troops the blaze of bronze armor, splendid and superhuman, flared across the earth, flashing into the air to hit the skies." As a huge fire that you see from a distance, just so the blaze of all the light shining on their bronze armor. There are also multiple examples of repetition within the poetry. If we remember, epic poetry was once part of oral tradition, and so it was memorized and recited. And so there are passages that are verbatim, one place to another. For example, the speech that the dream gives to Agamemnon, he then repeats word for word to his generals as a memory device for the poet who is reciting this. Or the message that Hera tells to Athena, she then repeats to Odysseus to get the men in line. There's also lots of personification in this. Now, many of the gods are really just personification. They are ideas projected into personhood. But some key examples in this particular book are the dream that is personified and comes down to speak to Agamemnon. There's also symbolism in this book, particularly in the symbolism of the scepter. Odysseus, instead of running straight to the men, goes and takes the scepter from Agamemnon, which gives him a kind of authority. And it shows the need for authority in order to create order and structure. It's the scepter that he uses to get people back in line. And it's the scepter that he uses to beat down Thersites, who is trying to break the authority of the leaders. Finally, there's a great example of dramatic irony when Agamemnon tells his dream and tells how this shows that they're about to win the war. Nestor stands up and says, "Friends, lords of the Argives, O my captains, if any other Achaean had told us of this dream, we'd call it false and turn our backs on it. But look, the man who saw it has every claim to be the best. the bravest Achaean we can field. And so the book goes out of its way to emphasize how the characters completely believe this dream, and Nestor completely supports Agamemnon. It must be true if Agamemnon said it, although all of us know, as an audience, that this is not true. Here's the characters completely aloof to the fact that this is a trick and a manipulation by the gods. That's it for book 2. Thanks for watching. You can click to subscribe or watch another video, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.